Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry for that delay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the industry noise database that has been compiled for industry. So I present all the data that was there, that was captured, and also the findings on that. So if we look at what we have said in the initially, is that we would like to compile a database to get a baseline to see where we actually stand, and that was one of the three working groups initiatives. And so we will just look now at this one about the noise source inventory. So when we refer to the inventory, we also refer as the database, because you can only compile your inventory if you have a sufficient or a complex database. In 2014, we started to gather some information on noise equipment, and we have said that we will compile this database only on equipment that's above 100 decibels. So we've collected the data since then, up to the middle end of 2015, and then we had a look at all the data from the different mining houses. So later on, I'm just going to show you some things that we've picked up. So we have said initially that we would like the following minimum requirements. So we had a look at the main community. So for example, we know that there are platinum mines producing platinum, gold mines, gold, coal, and so on. So we said that let us report on the different shafts. So what we would like to do is to actually create a database, a baseline, and say from this baseline, this is where industry actually is. So if we look, for example, a rock drill is to maybe compare different rock drills at different mines and say, maybe mine A has got a very good example of a muffled machine. Then we look at the type of mining. So for example, it's conventional. Maybe you've measured in a pre-ledge. So we wanted to differentiate between all these measurements that was taken. Also the activity of the workplace, there we refer to the sum of code, the type of equipment. For example, there we will look at the rock drill. We know that this is a rock drill, but we know this is a S215. But you also get a S36, you get a prem fit, you start to get, there's a development on a S217, so there's a Kempi. So there's different rock drills that you can get. So by compiling this database, by just say it is a rock drill, we cannot compare the data to each other, because otherwise we will compare this rock drill to a drill, and I'll actually show you some of the data that was in the database that actually referred to certain rock drills. We also refer to the power source, so we would like to know whether it's actually compressed air driven, whether it's pneumatic, maybe electro-hydraulic. We've heard just now that there's different things that we need to look at. For example, certain mines need to look at the collaring point. Some of us need to look at the rock drill itself because of the mechanical noise. Then the model. As we said, for example, S215, but we also know that at certain mines, you have maybe a company A producing this cylinder and a company B. So company A could differ from company B. So we would like to actually look at that as well. So the manufacturer that we just alluded to, maybe whether it's silenced or not silenced, muffled, not muffled. If we look, for example, at a fan, sometimes we just say it's a fan, it's got a silencer, but what silencer? Is it from the OEM? Is it something that we bought from the OEM? Is it something that's coming from China? So it's just something to look at. Then also the number of pieces of equipment per shaft or area. So it was, in some instances, people actually reported the number of equipment that was measured. So a company A will, for example, report and says, we have a S215, or we have a drill rig or a fan, and then the number of equipment is then 1. So certain mines then reported and says, we have the same equipment, but we have 4,000 of them. So it's also to report on those things to actually compare apples with apples. Then also your noise level, which will be a logarithmic average calculated, and later on I'll just show you that. So if you have, for example, 10 measurements, you will then calculate it not on a straight average, and rather on a log average as to compensate for the double of intensity. Just to look at the milestone, when your wife wakes you at night, what first should come into your mind is that by December 2024, 107 decibels, you should know that, and all of us should know that. And that's why it's important to have the milestone, and we know that we will voluntarily meet that. Then if we look at monitoring, that is actually where we come to the database. So James alluded on the actual measuring of that, and there was also made use of a S215, a rock drill, and we know that there are various pieces of equipment that we can measure, and where there can be questions, for example, a drill rig. Where do you measure a drill rig? Is it where the guy is operating it? You can't measure it in front, it's unsafe. So there's a lot of scenarios that we can still workshop and see what we need to do on that. Then, for example, we should just remember that the process or the operational noise, that is mainly for what that piece of equipment was intended to. For example, you can get a grinder, which operates at 80 decibels, but once it touches the steel, when you start to grind, it'll then maybe go to 110 decibels or whatever you've measured. So it's always for the purpose it's intended to. In the database, we actually refer to some of those codes from the SAMOP codebook. So we all know this SAMOP codebook. So there's certain codes in there, and for example, the main community list, for example, we as the platinum mines, we will go and say, well, it's PT. For example, as asbestos mine will say it's AS, and that is just to eventually compare apples with apples. Then the activity code, we know that we have heard, for example, the excavation has got a huge impact on noise levels. So for example, we will also maybe look at stoping, developing, whatever is there, where you've measured this piece of equipment, to put that in as well. Then the data, we've had the template that was sent out had some criteria in there, an example as well to say this is for an example how you can actually to fill it in. And right at the top, there was a comment put in. If you open up the comment, it will actually give them a little bit more of an explanation in that scenario. If we look, for example, the naming convention that's used, all of these names were on the database. They are all for this, hopefully for this drill. So you can see there's maybe about 13 names just on the database for this, which makes it very difficult to eventually to compare these things or to stipulate where it actually will then fall in. So that is, for example, why the model is and the OEM is very important. Looking at the data itself at the database, is that was the number of readings received from the different mines. So that is just in percentages, and it just gives you an idea of the distribution. So we don't want to go into nitty-gritty detail on each of that. And then, for example, also percentage-wise on the equipment per company. So yes, the idea is to eventually get all the guys to report. Then, when we actually do our measurements, and we have the different measurements now, as James said to us, we will have, for example, on a rock drill, we will have maybe 105 decibels, 103, 108.2, 104. So we will go and then calculate the logarithmic average, and then we will end up with an end value of 105.8. So those of you who maybe quickly want to pull out your calculator, you are more than welcome to quickly calculate that. But all of us are very clever, so we're using Excel to do that for us. So in the data, what we will send out is, we'll also send out a template for that you can actually use. So in there, what we have, for example, done is, we put in the total number of equipment, let's say 220. The units to be measured is 11. So that is based on a minimum of 5 or 5%. Then, out of all of these readings, the minimum value that was measured was 98.1, the maximum 108.2. So we have measured 9 out of that. So you'll see it's actually in red. So what we've done, we've just put in conditional formatting on this. If we haven't met the goal, it'll stay red. As soon as you've measured 11, it'll then just turn green, just to help you just to actually see whether you've met that, and then the different readings that was taken. Looking at this, we also know that we had to report on to the Chamber of Mines on quarter 3-4 for 2015, and quarter 1 for 2016 is around the corner. So what we've said is that you will have to report on these things. So if we can combine these things together. So remember, initially for the industry purpose, it was to report equipment above 100 decibels. What is required by the Chamber of Mines is that we report on all the equipment. That is the one that we said that will go to the CEOs for their discussion. So there's also a template that we have drawn up to assist you, that you can put in your values in there. It works exactly the same as the previous one, but for the different quarters, it also will just also calculate the rolling average going forward for those different quarters. So for example, in this one, in the activity area stoping, we have a S215 rock drill. There's also the same piece of equipment on development, and then you'll see there for development, it's a S36 rock drill, so we can actually go and bolt onto these things. But when you actually fill it in, it will calculate these things for that specific piece of equipment. Then for the way forward is that we need to do measurements. We've heard it's not that easy to actually go and do these measurements. It takes some effort, especially from people doing that. Then also, to maintain this database, there's a requirement of doing a minimum of 5 or 5%. That is to actually populate that, and that will be then also reported quarterly, so that we can actually, the trends can be checked. And this will then, so if we compile all of this data, this will enable us as an industry to actually compare certain pieces of equipment, whether it's a S215, whether it's a 75 kilowatt fan, whether it's a 75 kilowatt winch, it doesn't matter, but at least we can now compare apples with apples. Also to do some follow-ups, maybe there's something standing out. Certain mines maybe have the answer for the muffler, and then we can follow up on that as well. And then also, it's for the IBMQI, is to actually involve the OEMs to say, this is what we have, and you need to actually give us an answer on our requirements. So what I can do is I can, for example, show you on an Excel spreadsheet, if you would like to see if we actually, when we capture these things and how it actually populates. If you don't mind, I'm just going to sit down here. This is the example that I've just shown you on the screen. So for example, you'll see if I delete these different readings, it'll actually change. So I can go and insert additional readings that I took underground. So maybe I've measured 108. Sorry, just want to put the numbers lock on. Sorry, I've just got one hand. I'm not really so slow on a PC. So there's another reading, 108. You can see there it now changes this one. It actually changed now to 10. If I add another value, it will now change to green. So that it's just a template that we've drawn up that can assist people to say, well, yes, I've met my goal, and I haven't met my goal, and just to assist wherever we can. So we will send this to Dickie and his team, and then they will decide, and maybe there are some other suggestions as well on how we can do that. But it is just a simple plain Excel sheet just to assist us with the calculations. Any questions?
If you just do the formula the way it is, you're not getting 105.8. What I picked up is in the brackets, once you've done that, there's 4 like that 4 machines, you divided that first by 4, and then you take the log to get the 105.8.
Okay, well,
What I'm saying is, if you do the calculation as is, as you show the formula,
Yes.
you're getting 105.8. And I couldn't work it out, and then I thought, okay, let's try. So what I picked up is in the brackets, you need to divide, if there's 4 machines, you divide, once you've done the calculation in brackets, divide by 4, and then you take the log of that, multiply by 10.
okay, maybe just with the copy and paste, I just maybe skipped then that step.
I couldn't figure it out at first.
That's why I say we are clever, we rather using Excel. So at least there I cover myself. Any other question?
There were issues around quality of content in terms of reporting. So I don't know how much discretion you have in terms of changing the format of the report, or is it standard even, for example, when you have the naming convention, how do you then with the system make sure that people don't think in their own naming convention, but still the naming convention?
On the initial database that was sent out, there was, it wasn't hard locked or something. It's just an Excel spreadsheet with a lookup, and there were some things added at the end so that you can actually click it from a drop down. But unfortunately, some of us changed it and thought it's not necessary to put it in. And I think that is why we actually come to a place like this and we tell everybody, please just take note, that is why we actually need those things. And I think the problem, or maybe not the problem, but the real thing actually starts underground when we measure, because if we don't measure or record those things, then we can't put it into a database. And that is, so everything starts off when we're actually doing the measurement somewhere underground with somebody and say, this is what we measure, this is what we record, so that we can report to the 12.1, to the top, eventually ending up where the data should be.
Anton, in terms of that tool, I think it's an excellent tool. I honestly want to be honest with you. It gave me goosebumps when I saw it. Now, for the purpose of milestone, how do we then convert it for people to use that tool to report on the milestones? Remember, it goes to the number of equipment and exceeding this. How do we convert that? Or how do we use that tool to report on milestones? Can we go back to this?
You specifically refer now to that sheet. Well, what we can do as a suggestion, and it hasn't been discussed with anything, but what can be done is that we will compile these pieces for every quarter. So you will have this sheet where you actually capture all your values that was measured previously, and then you can just have a link in your sheet that will actually populate that sheet that needs to go to the Chamber of Mines. So it is possible, but just by putting in some links and calculations, to actually have a template for everybody to use. But then, I think then somebody can just sit and assist with that, and then we come up with a solution, or with Brian, or with you.
Maybe not a question, just probably to you. So, I always maintain, you can have the best system, best Excel spreadsheet, everything in place. The quality of the data depends on the people that are actually entering the data. Okay? So, that's where the problem comes. That's point number one. So, this is a good database, and any information can be drawn out of it, including the milestones. But it's going to be only as good as the people that populate the system. And, I said to Brian, just my view. So a lot of information goes to the chamber or goes to Bosch. And then when it gets there, the people that actually were supposed to submit it, or the heads of departments, say, no, we're not happy with the information. So in my view, the information needs to be signed off by the head of department or the DP before it is submitted. And then you live and you die by the information that you have populated. You don't travel afterwards. Because my concern is the following. Usually when the data is bad. You run the Excel spreadsheet or the way report, and that's not true. It's a good database. You can draw the milestone information from it, and I think that's easy to do. What we need is two things. Number one, we all need to agree this is what it should look like. Okay? And if the GEs, I think we have sort of put down the milestone reporting template. Okay? A couple of proper here and there. And then, after that, we should just keep the people responsible for the data that they submit. Okay, because I think that is where we fail, is that you just submit data, and then after it's submitted, and you want to present to the CEO, then you want to try that the data is correct.
Mornay, I agree fully with that, because just to, for example, to go back on this description, for example, on the database, we need to, from the onset, we need to go and actually record the proper information. Is it a S215? Is it a Excel Flow 75 kilowatt fan, or is it just a fan, or is it a pump, or is it a vertical spindle pump, or is it a vortex, or those type of things? We need to keep proper record of that. And I agree fully with what Mornay says. If we don't have the information, that this template will definitely not force us to complete it properly.
Sorry, just one more point, sorry. What we also need to do is we have to ensure that we submit data once. And that data can be used for all the things that we have to report on. Because the problem is that we've got to submit data for the Chamber of Mines. Then the Mines Health and Safety Council have got a different way that they want to submit it. Then the DMR got their way. So what the database must be able to do is all the information that needs to go to the various end users, it must be in such a way that you can actually use that same database and just draw that information out. That you don't have 4 or 5 different reports. The poor oak on the shaft has to compile every quarter. It should be one report and maybe different extracts out of that database. But I've got a serious concern that you're reporting to so many people that you generate unnecessary work. And I think that's a thing that there should be a single point in that you don't generate 4 or 5 different kinds of reports.
I definitely support that, and I think industry will also support that.
I just want to know, are we going to report on the average noise level per type of equipment on the quarterly report? The milestone report?
Yes, if we, for example, I just want to go to that example. Let's say, for example, that one, the S215, we will report on the log average and not on the straight average, because the tendency of the log average is to go more to the higher levels.
So then if that piece of equipment is now below 107, then you don't add that, then that doesn't count as equipment above 107 for the milestones. But what happens if I measure one piece of equipment which is above 107? Then do I add that to my milestone? Yes, I've got one piece, or how does that work?
I think Brian will maybe answer that better, because that is exactly what I think was a discussion at the GEs as well.
Yeah, but I mean, that needs to be clear, because if you read the milestone, it says operational process noise emitted by any equipment must not exceed. So yeah, I just need clarity there.
Brian, can you assist us on that one?
No, you can't. And I'll defend you now. I'll tell you why you can't. Because the GEs can't defend themselves until they haven't made a decision. Okay, so that subtle nuance, okay, is still a debate with the GEs, and we actually now, in the tea break session, decided that we've got to get a couple of the groot backup, okay, so that's James and his friends, okay, into a room that we have that debate, okay, and we see where we end up, that we all agree, and some of us won't agree, but that the industry, okay, the majority of the industry agrees on how we will report on that. Because let me make it more complex. Okay, so you've got a rock roll. Free fuel, it does 102. Workplace, you say 106 plus the 3, which is new equipment, you can measure it, it actually gives you 106. okay? In a stope, that's 1.2, and the backfill is 5 meters away from the face. Now you take that same machine, and that machine moves, the crew moves to a new stope. It did 106 underground at the workplace. Nothing has changed. Same piece of equipment. Goes to a stope with a 90 centimeter stoping width, and the backfill is 3.5 meters away from the face. All of a sudden that machine is doing 105, or 107, or 108. Same piece of equipment, you measured it once, it gave you below 107, now it's above 107, and the only thing that's changed is the underground working. So it's not a simple, straightforward debate. It's a debate that needs to be had, and it's a debate that we're going to have, and before, well, sooner than later, we're going to have to put that debate to rest and come up with a definition. But that's my view. I don't know if there's anybody else that's really got an answer for us, but I'm surely the DEs has to come with an answer, right?
Okay, Brian, sorry you can't answer that one. We'll park that for later. Any other question? Thank you very much.